ready to talk hockey. Streaming from the Oilers Live studio. Subscribe or follow today.
Hey, it's Michael here with Oilers Live, coming to you live on another Thursday night. We've got another special guest for you today, Mr. Brendan Escott. Welcome. And, of course, as always, Mr. Mike Dursa. He's sort of my guest all the time. I don't know, at what point do you stop being a guest and you're just a host? Maybe tonight. Maybe tonight's your night, Mike. Welcome, Brendan.
Hey, thanks, guys. I mean, it sounds like when you get the name on the show, that's when you guys can go Mike and Mike with it, right?
That's right. We haven't got there yet. Well, I guess contracts are probably still being written up, and I've got legal on it, and we'll see what happens. You never know. Just as long as negotiations don't go sideways, you're all right. We should be able to get you a good 1-2 year deal, Mike, and maybe keep you under the cap. Who knows? We'll see. See what happens. This is a big world of podcasting we're in. How was your day, Brendan?
You know what? I mean, it's kind of becoming the new norm of unusual. Our show, Oilers Now, is kind of getting bumped around for provincial and civic press conferences and stuff like that. Obviously, sports is kind of on the back burner right now in some ways, but a pretty average day for me. Still going into work, and I'm super fortunate to be able to do that. So, yeah, I mean, all things good on my front, and very grateful to be able to say that. How about you guys?
For me, it was, just the usual day. I'm pretty flexible in my work, so I get to work from home, and not much has changed other than the office that I'm in. I work from the podcast office now. Instead, before this just used to be kind of the place I go to have my fun chats about hockey. Now it's the place I go to have my fun chats about work. So it's no big difference for me, I guess. Yeah. How about you, Mike?
Well, my work days have kind of shortened a little bit. Like I work at a place where we sell flooring accessories, so we're still considered an essential service. So, but we've kind of cut our hours back, and we don't, like before we would let retail people in the store. Now we just kind of cater to stores, and if retail people come, we pretty much sell to them out our overhead door and take our debit machine right there, so we don't have people coming in and touching things and whatever, so we don't have to disinfect everything other than the debit machine. So it's changed a little bit, but I'm fortunate to be working, and I see Brendan there. I think he's drinking a Miller Lite, and my grandfather would be proud of that.
It's a High Life, actually. Miller High Life.
Yeah, sorry. Not Miller Lite. Even better.
Beers, Mike.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll peel back the curtain a little bit for you guys, and we're talking about numbers being reduced at work. So on a typical work day at 6:30, Chad, when we're not in a pandemic, there's about 60 people in the building, and that's between sales and we don't have traffic there, which is like where commercials get played, but we do have creative department, so the people that make the commercials. So that's all downstairs with our FM stations, and then Chad and 880 is upstairs. What was once a 60-ish person staff is down to like less than 10 now. So when I say I'm like fortunate to be at work, I am really fortunate to be at work.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? Is we just there's lots of people that are affected in all sorts of different ways. The least of which is just having to stay home, right? Like that's, you know what? I mean, if that's what you're affected with, then be happy you've got something that's paying the bills and going that way. Lots of tough decisions. Anyway, we've gone off topic because we have a bit of a rule since this has all started that we try not to mention the existing existing troubles that are out there and go try to keep it lighthearted and do something that takes our mind off of that. And we try to keep talking about hockey. We're starting to slowly run out of hockey things to talk about, but with the loosening of some of the restrictions lately, specifically today in Alberta and, in the U.S., you've heard a few different things. I'm not sure that the curve, quote unquote, is flattened yet, but we're, at least some of the restrictions are lifted. We kind of, have some idea. There's a committee that's been formed with our very own Connor McDavid on there, the Return to Play Committee. have you heard anything new today, or I mean, because I think tomorrow's kind of May 1st. That's kind of the big day, right? Like that's where some places people are back to work. Was there anything out today that I'm not privy to or I haven't heard yet?
I think everything at this point is basically public knowledge. What we know is what we've heard from the Premier, Jason Kenney, at the press conferences, just with respect to whether the league is still exploring Alberta as an option for potentially neutral site games, if that's the way that they go. And while they've only had one phone conversation, Kenney doubled down yesterday, I believe it was, and said that the Oilers and the league are in conversations. So it's certainly a possibility. Part of the problem right now is that they want to get these players back in, and because they are in Sweden right now, and that country's handled things very, very differently, but they've got players out on the ice. So when you hear the Oilers, and I'm sure we'll touch on this too, signing a guy like a Theodor Lundstrom, for example, I mean, Lundstrom's not had the kind of offseason that these NHLers had, so maybe that gives him a bit of a bonus. But, part of the problem back on North American soil is going to be finding the competitive balance once everybody starts to be allowed to work out in those similar small groups between a city like ours in Edmonton, where the disease or the virus, for example, is not necessarily as widespread as it is in Toronto or New York. So are the Maple Leafs and Rangers not going to be allowed to practice or work out in their facilities? Are they going to have to fly somewhere else to do it? That, to me, is where they're at in terms of getting this back rolled out again.
Yeah, and I think that's there's so many questions. I mean, you kind of you get outside on a day like today and you see a little bit more activity and you think, oh, we could be back at this in 2 weeks, and then you think, a place like New York is still really in the throes of this, and they don't necessarily have that option. Then you read about some of the players that are outside of the playoffs, and you hear, sort of some of the negativity that's been thrown around about going anywhere where you might be sequestered for a period of time. You've got to think, though, that the Oilers are itching to get back at it. I mean, this is a franchise and a team that's desperately needed this, and we, it just seems so unreal that in a year that we could really make a push in the playoffs, and I felt like we were getting some momentum going down the path at the end there, during the race, and then this happens, and it's almost like a tragic comedy, that this could happen to the Oilers, and I don't know. I mean, how excited would you be? I mean, this is since you've been working with Oilers now. You started after 2017, right? Is it year 2 you're on?
Yeah, that's right. Fortunately, I had the pleasure of being in the city while that cup, I think that was my first year in Edmonton, as a matter of fact, when they made the playoffs finally. So that was really cool to see, like, just the life that gets breathed into every aspect of what Edmonton is. You go to a Boston Pizza in the middle of the week and there's hooting and hollering and the goal horns going off and stuff like that. Like, it's, look no further than the background here for you, Mike. This place is like so desperate for meaningful hockey, and that's not lost on the players. Like, Connor McDavid is in year 5 here, which is hard for me to believe, but to think that, like, how hungry he must be. And now we're seeing Leon really emerge as somebody who can carry an offensive thrust that should get this team pretty deep into the playoffs, which, I mean, listen, I sold this team short at the beginning of the year. See where it came towards them, where it all gets nipped in the bud. I mean, yeah, this is a devastating year for them to have happen, and it is almost comical, isn't it, given the recent history of this franchise?
I think that and part of it's just a history for us that we've waited so long for anything to come around, and then we did have 1 year, and then the following year we were Stanley Cup favorites, not to make the playoffs. It just seems like, you just go into every year expecting the worst. And if the best happens, like you make the playoffs or something, which has never happened. So if you expect the worst has happened every year. And so I think everybody sold them short. There were a few sort of diehard fans that kind of said to themselves, this is the year. But we've been saying that for the greater part of 14 years. And nothing. I mean, 1 year just, doesn't cut it. And finally we're there. And even, a few weeks prior to being set down on lockdown, people had joked, what if this year, is the year we don't have a playoffs because of coronavirus, and I remember looking at that and thinking, no, it just can't be. It just can't be. But sure enough, there's the possibility. Do you think there's any possibility that the playoffs don't happen?
It depends which pundit you're listening to. And Brian Burke is somebody that we're blessed to have on our show once a week, every Thursday, and he's not convinced. He's not necessarily convinced that we are going to see the resumption in any form of the 2019-2020 campaign, whether that's finishing the regular season, getting every team to some sort of a games played threshold. I've heard 68 games. I've heard 72. I think everybody has played 68, so that might be a logical place to nip it off. But then you're talking about points percentage. And that's where we get teams like Vancouver, for example, right on the fringe, right on the cusp. And they're saying, well, why aren't we getting a chance at least for a play-in game or something like that? So I think that based on what we heard from today's press conference, and today is Thursday, the April 30th, there's more reason for me to believe that this might get going like early July than there was last week. But I'd like to hear something from the league. And what's not encouraging to me is that the league hasn't come forward to the Alberta government with any sort of a proposal for using Rogers Place as a neutral site, because that would mean that they've got the process accelerated that much more. So maybe we'll see next week. But unfortunately, I can see a scenario in which they just fast forward right to the 2020-2021 season.
They'd have to start it early. I don't know if I could take that much longer without hockey. Yeah. So, one of the things while we have you here is you do play-by-play for the Crusaders. Is that right?
Yeah, you betcha.
Yeah. So we actually, I don't know. I think in fact, I know we did a little charity hockey tournament.
Yeah.
On Hunter's birthday, as a matter of fact, February 29th. And it was quite successful. We had a lot of fun. One of the silent auction items was season pass to or a pair of season passes, I guess, to the Crusaders, and they were having a hell of a year in the AJHL. Have you talked, what's that franchise doing? What's the AJHL doing during the lockout? There's got to be some concerns there for a team, for a league like that. That's it's not like a big moneymaker or anything like that, and any type of stoppage has got to hurt immensely. And I'm certain, unfortunately, we talked about it. Layoffs have got to happen. What's the word from the AJHL right now?
From team to team, it is going to be different because of the individual ownership groups. Fortunately, the Crusaders, I think, are in a pretty good spot that way. Some of the smaller franchises is where you start to worry. There was some rumors circulating on Twitter that maybe Olds was in a worse spot than they actually are. But, there's a lot of uncertainty because we saw the Calgary Mustangs sort of on a whim fold up before the start of this most recent season. So there is an element of fragility there. And part of the problem now is that they're so heavily reliant on the gate. So, when you get as far as the Crusaders did, for example, and they didn't even end up playing any playoff games, guys. They advanced into the second round, and by the time the puck was set to drop on that, it was like a couple days. I think the guys said that they were ready to start on Saturday night, would have been the opener against Drayton Valley for the Crusaders in round 2, and they found out on Thursday after their practice that it was done. It was canceled. So that would have been right after the Oilers against Winnipeg game when we found out originally. So our team's in dire straits, not on the surface right now, but quite possibly this does have the potential to harm at least a couple franchises. I'm not going to highlight any of them. Frankly, I don't necessarily know the numbers as far as the pockets go, but there is a level of concern. And then, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, but this is something the Crusaders were building towards the culmination of this playoffs this season for a couple of years, and their recruiting and guys that they were bringing back and promises that they were making and that sort of thing. So I think that's where a lot of people are so devastated is everything over not 1 year, but at least 2 was built towards this. And then the fruits of the labor sort of get rotten on the tree before they can even be plucked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And I think, where they're, you got to think too with a league like the AJHL, right, where there's always 1 or 2 guys that get drafted every year into the NHL. but those guys need the playoffs in order to sort of differentiate themselves from the guys playing in the CHL, right? I think they need those extra games, and that's got to hurt some of these guys that are looking to get, draft ranking, because they don't quite get the same showing that, the other players might get. Anybody in particular that comes to mind that you think was moving up and might have had a good playoff? I know I'm putting you on the spot, so if nobody comes to mind, that's fine. That's the kind of question I should have asked you in advance, but
No, no, not at all. I mean, I think what I can say about that is this. I mean, who doesn't it hurt? It doesn't hurt your guys like a Michael Benning, a Carter Savoy out of the Crusaders program, or for like an Ethan Edwards or a Kabore Dunn out of either Spruce Grove or Fort McMurray. These kids had scouts watching them since last season. I mean, the guys know what they're going to get. We're doing post-game interviews. There's NHL teams talking to these guys all the time. That's not the issue. The problem comes for the 20-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, the 20-year-olds who didn't necessarily have those scouts eyeing them, but also now are robbed of the opportunity in that high-pressure situation with the microscope on them, the magnifying glass on the players. Now you don't get the opportunity to have a standout game when the scouts are there watching one of these marquee names. So who really loses out here, guys, is the 20-year-old who was looking for a scholarship, even if it was to the ACAC instead of NCAA. That's who doesn't get the look, and that's where my heart really breaks for a lot of these players.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't. You're right. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is these guys, and now they're sitting there. It's not like an NHL player that has got the cash and the money. If they didn't have the equipment already at home, which not surprised, a lot of them didn't, right? But they could still order it, right? Like they could have, they could have ordered off of Amazon everything they needed to make a home gym with the money they make. But these guys, they don't necessarily have that, right? Like they don't have the access to the trainers and to everything that an NHL player would have. So, this unscheduled off season without the ability to just go into your local gym is also a real challenge for some of these kids. Not to mention, I really feel like at that age, at that 18 to 20-year-old age, look at Ethan Bear, right? Not all of these guys have really fully realized what it's going to take. And so getting a month off of hockey sometimes might just kind of go sideways on you. And maybe you get a couple too many burgers or, a few too many skip the dishes, right? And before you know it, you're out of game shape and you're taking longer next when new camp comes around.
100% fair comment, and that's a great example. But these guys are learning, and maybe it only sets them back a year, and maybe it is a good learning experience, but that year could be the difference between a scholarship and not coming up in the 2020-2021 season. You know what I mean? So I hope for their sake that the kids are taking it seriously. And then you look at a lot of the kids that have the verbal commitments to some of these NCAA clubs, and particularly the guys that are going to transfer down south of the border, assuming that border opens in time. They're getting training programs. So now it's just a matter of, are you responsible enough to stick to them? But that's not the case for every player, right? So there's going to be maybe more of a talent gap between some of the guys making the jump out of minor league programs who aren't going to have that access to the trainer, unless the parents can shell out the money for something private, for example. But the difference between those kids and the kids who are already getting the favorable treatment because they're likely to make that next step, I mean, now you're starting to see more of a divide, right?
Yeah, 100%. You're right. There's just so many unfortunates for this. We talk about the NHL because that's what we love. And you got a guy like Connor McDavid and another guy like Leon Draisaitl, and how can you not spend your focus on that? But there's a lot of good hockey. AJHL, the Crusaders, it's great hockey right in your back door, right? And backyard. And I'm actually based in Calgary, and out here, of course, we've got Brooks and a number of great teams out this way. Unbelievable, right? That all of these leagues, not just the NHL, but all of them are suffering in some way. And when as I keep going back, this development and this time off is it's just going to change the game. And I think, in Europe, you see those guys on the ice still, right? Like there's
Yeah.
there's going to be who knows. I mean, granted, it's only been a couple months, but I just find I remember being that age, believe it or not. But I do remember being that age, and I remember a month off of anything was felt devastating because your body just changed so quickly back when you're younger, and you could gain so much in a year at that age that to take a couple months off is probably a lifetime for some.
And I just worry about the interest waning. It's a huge commitment to play at that level. And, I'm even a little bit worried because with obviously working for two hockey teams or working alongside two hockey teams, like my winter schedule is absolutely bananas. And I would imagine that for a 16, 17-year-old kid, that's no different playing for one of these teams. The difference is my exercise comes from walking up the stairs. Theirs is on the ice getting skated every single day, right? So maybe, I hope this isn't the case, but maybe this weans out some of the guys whose commitment, whose heart wasn't truly into the process.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like, yeah, I mean, it is a commitment, right? Especially, I keep going back. I keep thinking back to being that age and how that would have affected you. How about you, Mike? Would you? You remember back then? What was that, like 80 years ago for you, or no?
Yeah.
We're the same age.
It's probably hard. It's probably hard to come back from the Dustin Penner diet that some people might be on right now to that elite, disciplined eating, exercise regimen, all that. It probably is challenging. I mean, I don't think you get to the NHL level if you aren't, extremely disciplined now. You might have got away with that years ago, but I don't think you do now. So I don't think those guys have to worry. But kind of guys, in the AJHL and CHL, they kind of aren't at that elite level yet. So but if you aren't training hard and eating right and doing everything right every day, you're going to be left behind anyway.
Yeah, that's a really fair comment. And like you said too, Mike, like that's just modern hockey. I would even go so far as to say that's modern sports. Basically, you look at where these kids are getting drafted into the WHL. It's coming out of prep schools. It's coming out of environments where, even take the financial aspect out of how expensive it would be to get that kind of training. I mean, if you don't, a lot of the time you kind of get overlooked. So, I say I really hope that doesn't impact some of these kids as negatively as it has the potential to. But it also might really make them realize what dedication it's going to take to make that next level or take that next step if that's what they want to do. I'm also glad you brought up Dustin Penner, by the way. So I'm not going to go into the Twitter stuff. That was a trip to watch. I hope that he's doing okay. I hope that he can, figure that stuff out. He swore on our show. He swore on Oilers Now inadvertently the last time. It's former players do that, okay? It is what it is. Last night, gentlemen, I had a dream that he did it again, and I woke up panicking, believe it or not. So I'm glad that you brought him up. Thinking, no, that didn't happen twice.
I do remember
he said something on Hockey Night in Canada is the funniest thing I ever heard an athlete say. Scott Oak was interviewing him, and Scott Oak says, "What have you been doing to get yourself in such great shape this year?" And he said, "I've cut back on the wheat-based drinks and Sour Patch Kids."
I have.
At first everybody's like, wheat-based drinks. What is he? Oh, beer. Oh,
wait a minute. Yeah, I love that. One of very few former University of Maine Black Bears. I was looking that up today as well.
Oh man,
is that where Paul Kariya played too?
It sure is. Yeah, you betcha. Yeah, John Tortorella, way back in time, and Jim Montgomery, by the way. Jim Montgomery has his number retired as a Maine Black Bear, all-time leading scorer. There's your fun fact for the day.
There we go.
All right. There will be a quiz after the show, by the way.
Do you get to teach Bob a couple of facts too, or does he have them all?
Oh man, you can't teach Bob anything. There's got to be. Yeah, his name comes up.
Enough said. Enough said.
I'll tell you, Brendan. His name comes up on the stream whenever I forget something. I always think I'm not Bob Stauffer, right? Like I can't remember absolutely everything that guy. Yeah, unbelievable. Like his memory,
it's phenomenal working alongside him in that respect because it's almost superhuman the way that he can recall not only the event on the ice, but where he was, who he was with, and what he was drinking at the time that it was happening. Come on, bro. The problem is when he quizzes me on something that happened before my parents were even born. And I'm like, what do you want me to do here, man? I got a lot of catching up to do in terms of my trivia.
Oh, man. Yeah.
He's the Cliff Clavin of like Edmonton media, isn't he?
Oh.
That reference, I'm sorry, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah, where everybody knows your name, right? Okay,
Yeah,
I'm not
cheers.
young.
Yeah.
Cliff and Bob Stauffer, same guy.
Oh yeah, it sounds 70s and 80s television. That's his secondary wheelhouse.
I think Bob would have loved that analogy for sure. He'd love to be called the Cliff Clavin of hockey. He's unbelievable. He I like listening to him. I'm glad that he took over Oilers Now back then, and it's been good. And sometimes he says some things. You're right, like. When you talk about remembering what he was drinking and like he just has this memory that is unbelievable. But you'll sit there and it's good because it flows. It doesn't seem like he's, when I have to stop and think about something, I got to go through the, there's some ums and some ahs and
the
I'm
old
waiting,
mental filing cabinet.
The mental filing cabinet. And I finally get there and half the show is over. And then Dursa says, "Oh yeah, well we're done talking about that, Mike," and so we keep going, and but he pulls that stuff just out of nowhere. Back to hockey. Sorry.
Just before we move on from this, that's a really good thing that you just brought up because when Bob walks in, I hope I don't get in trouble for peeling back this curtain too. I mean, I don't often see him with a set of notes. Now, I know when he does the actual color commentary, he's got an incredibly detailed book. Sometimes we've tweeted the pictures out. It's really cool. A lot for me to follow. Very different from my own play-by-play prep. But when he walks in to do the show, I mean, obviously there's some stuff done behind the scenes, but so much of that is off the top of his head. There's no notes in front of him. I bring my binder in when I host, and I fill up 1 page worth of prep for every guest that we have, just to make sure, because I don't have that memory to rely on to be able to fill that time. Bob doesn't need that kind of an aid. Yeah, he's been doing it a long time, but you got to tip the cap when it comes to his ability to have that on the tip of his tongue with very little prep in front of him, at least.
So, 20 years from now, are you going to be like Bob? You're going to just be able to pull things out and say, "Oh yeah, I remember back when I was on Oilers Now with Stauffer." And
I like to believe so. The problem for me right now, and the reason I'm not as credible as I'd like to be yet, is just because I haven't had the work experience, right? But I like to think that I could go toe for toe or toe to toe with him one day, not anytime soon, but one day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's remarkable, and it's I think that not just Stauffer, but everybody. We had Dusty on the show last week on Monday. We had, of course, Jack Michaels on a few weeks ago. We've just, I think, and I think about it. I love the team, like the Oilers. I've loved them for a long time. Obviously, Mike's a huge fan. If you look behind him, we're all big fans here, and it's why we do this. We certainly don't do it for the money. I think about it. The other part of this team that doesn't get enough credit is the media that surrounds the team. Like even just like as dumb as it is, but a guy like Gene Principe and those damn puns, right? Like, but Principe's been there forever, right? And he's just like this, he's just this great guy that you listen to, and then there's, all sorts of great writers and lots of great things that have come up from Oilers Nation, right? It started in Edmonton and moved on to other cities, and it's all around the Oilers, right? And it's all we're just blessed with really good media in Edmonton.
Well, what I would say to that is, number one, that is a testament first and foremost to the fan base and wherever that was derived from, whether it's the fact that there's not much else to be happy about here in the wintertime some years other than the Oilers, or the history behind the team. But this is the most dedicated, passionate, and informed fan base in the league. I really believe that. Toronto's is too widespread, in my opinion. There's the original 6 teams are always going to carry their weight and fine. And the Habs, I'm sure you could make an argument. But to me, In my limited experience, obviously I'll give that caveat, but just like I'll reference back to what I said when I first moved here, and I didn't know anybody. I just went to Boston Pizza. I sat at the Lonely Guys section and I had a beer. Might have been a Miller High Life, not sure. But there's people screaming and hollering and the horns going around, and I'm thinking, this is the regular season, you guys, come on. But with respect to how the media goes, I really believe, guys, that we have such a good balance here between a guy like a Gene Principe, who you really need because he puts the players at ease, right? He's somebody he's harmless, he's funny, he's personable, he's warm, he's somebody that the players can trust, feel comfortable talking with. And then you shift gears with somebody like a Jim Matheson or even a Mark Spector at times, where there's a little bit more grit to the writing because there has to be, because that's what journalism is, because that's what the fan base craves when times aren't good, is that kind of harder hitting stuff. So maybe what you're saying, Mike, is it part and parcel to the fact that we have such a wide variety in our Edmonton media when it comes to covering this team, that you get a lot of different content, a lot of unique perspectives in that realm.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're just we're lucky, and I know Mike and I, we've had a chance to talk to some of these guys on and off air, and it's been great, right? Like, you get a different perspective. I like the fact that you bring up Spector, because he's typically a polarizing figure when it comes to Oilers media, and actually he could be polarizing on any given day. One day you might love him, and the next day you might hate him, right, for something that he said, but at the same time, right, like you kind of, if you don't have that, then you don't have the full spectrum of what makes really good media.
There's still a human being there to Mark Spector, though. Like, you get into some of the media members, like I used to live in Massachusetts for a year. You get into some of the Boston media, they're abrasive, they're pit bulls. There's not really a human side to them. Mm-hmm. So, some people didn't like Ryan Rishaug, but if you paid attention when he, talked about the Humboldt thing, if you didn't have a sense of humanity with that, you weren't a human yourself. I mean, he was generally invested in those people's lives, and you see that, and it's easier to take him, criticize an Oiler play, after seeing that. There's a human being there. Like, I don't see really anybody in Edmonton media as a shark or a pit bull. I don't see that.
Yeah, you know what? I've seen different circumstances where guys have been attacked a little bit as they were such, and frankly, I've seen some media members tweet some stuff that I kind of was like, oh shoot, like should you really be stoking the fire like that, right? So there's going to be that, and particularly with a franchise as up and down as the Oilers have been over the last decade and a half, right? There's going to be an element of some guys who have to dig in. There's been times where I've been uncomfortable in a room in a scrum where a question's been asked, thinking like I said, like, good God, I'd never ask that. But also with the utmost respect for the journalist that asked it, because you've got to get that story, right? So, there somebody like Ryan Rishaug, just on a professional level, if I may dip into this a little bit, like, he's been incredible for me in my own professional development, because I think that he's kind of a consummate pro in how he represents himself online, on TV, that sort of thing. So he's been somebody who I've really tried to sort of emulate my my presence, if you will, after. I think Schauger's a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome to hear. And that just goes back to everything that we have. I'm curious, you talk about the scrum, and I'm sure that there's still a lot of, you've been at this for a couple of years. There's probably a number of people that you haven't seen across the league, and in your who would you love to be in a scrum with, like, and head to head be the guy that's right out front and asking them questions? Is there anybody that comes to mind? I could think of one for me, and it would be Tortorella. Like, I would love to be face to face with Tortorella and just start ripping out questions. And I'd probably ask a couple stupid ones just to see if he would throw me out. But, I had Caleb Jones, Amy Jones' mom on the show, and we had a great, that was probably one of my favorite podcasts that I did. And she absolutely loves Tortorella, as does Seth, I think, Seth Jones, and the players. Like, he's really a player's coach. But as far as I just love seeing that guy in media scrums. Anyway, is there anybody that comes to mind for you that you'd love to, chat with and maybe ask some questions, be right in there and get some good questions in?
See, that's an interesting one. I mean, if you're going to open it up right around the league, I'm definitely going to need a minute to think. But while I'll do that, I'll tell you my favorite Oiler, and I don't know how much he comes off this way to you guys. Oscar Klefbom is about as warm and thoughtful an interview as I've had the pleasure of being around. He's thoughtful is probably the best word that I could use to describe it. But he's very articulate. He's very aware. So as far as Oilers go, he is up there for me, definitely. Around the league, I don't I'm a journalist, guys. Stock answers drive me bananas, but that's also part of our responsibility to ask a question that doesn't prompt a stock answer. So who are some of the more well-spoken guys around the league? That's who I'd really like to see. Like guys that could turn into broadcasters afterwards. That's who I'd really like to get out there and interview. Just on a personal level, as somebody like Brendan Gallagher, I'd love to see the Oilers sign him. Maybe next year, whenever that contract runs out, let's do that. He'd be an interesting one. For me, it's because he's a member of the NHLPA, right? So he's got a moral code. He stands behind it. He's passionate about this. Let's talk hockey. That sounds great to me.
That's interesting. Mike, is there anybody that comes to mind for you?
I'm just wondering, just to touch on what Brendan said there, could you have Brendan Gallagher and Zach Kassian kind of coexist in the same room, you think? Or is that kind of having two of the same player almost in a sense?
Oh, that's an interesting one. To me, it's like Gallagher and Yamamoto at that point because their games emulate each other so well. Kassian, off ice, he is one of the best interviews in that room, and that's not to discredit anybody else. It's to give credit for Zach for how much he's grown up, I think, over the last few years. So, do I like two Spitfires? Do I like three Spitfires down that right wing in a Western Conference playoff run? You're damn right I do.
Yeah,
it's funny you bring up that good interviews. My old roommate used to write for the Herald and travel with the Flames.
Okay.
And one of the things she said was, is that like Iginla, you could always get a quote from him, but it was the most canned response. And she said it was, and it's much like what you hear from Connor McDavid, right? Is that Iginla was a product, right? Like he ceased to be an individual in those types of environments. He was just, Iginla the brand. And so you kind of got what Iginla the brand represented every time. It was never, there was nothing too controversial. It was always, we'll give it 110% type of language. And then you get guys like Kassian and that are just off the cuff and they don't necessarily have the endorsements out there that they have to worry about everything they say, and you can get a really good interview from them and really kind of understand. Like I love the after hours segments when they have the right guys on there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get a feel, and one of the things I love, I play a lot of alumni tournaments like charity hockey tournaments, is having them in the dressing room and guys that you grew up. Mike and I grew up watching, and then you finally kind of hear exactly what was going on, behind the scenes, right? You never got that prior, but I totally 100% get that, and like as much as I love watching Connor McDavid, there is a distinct difference between him and say Draisaitl, right? Like Draisaitl is not the brand that Connor is yet. I mean, maybe that changes after this year. I'm curious, right? Like, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I have no doubt that his agents are doing everything to get him some new endorsements after the year he's had.
Yeah, and he's bloody well earned it over the last 2 seasons. I mean, I think it's even time for me to stop wondering whether this is the real thing and just accept that it is. He's a former 3rd overall pick, which is something that I have to remind myself of more often than not. It's not unfathomable for a 3rd overall pick to produce like he is, right? Like and particularly when you look at his stature, but man, guys, I've never seen people move the puck around the ice the way that he does. Connor does it with the puck on his stick. To me, Leon does it when he's moving the puck off of his stick, whether that's shooting or passing. So those are 2 very different ways that you could market somebody. But as far as personalities go, like, these kids are so young still. Like I say kids, I turned 26 in a few months here. They're younger than me. but they haven't had the time, nor have they had necessarily reason to trust the media. I would say I'm gonna throw that out there right now and say that I think because of how the team has performed here in recent years leading up to these kids all becoming the core of the franchise, there's a little bit of apprehension as to what they're willing to give the media to work with, right? I hope I'm not talking out of turn. I hope this doesn't come back to bite me in the ass. But I think that once these guys sort of mature and have some of these relationships form with some of these writers over the long term, right? I don't think Sidney Crosby was a very good interview when he first entered the league. That took time too. So when these guys get a little bit more comfortable in what they have to say for themselves, I think we'll see that dynamic shift a little bit towards marketability. That's also not an Oilers problem. That's an NHL problem, right? You look at how the players in this league are on social media, and it's miraculous to get any sort of personality out of them. And then you look at the NBA, and you just wish that some of these guys had shut the hell up. So where's the happy medium? I don't know, but I'd like to see the NHL get there.
Draymond Green, eh?
For real, like, man, put a sock in it.
Yeah.
So I actually don't know, Brendan. I mean, you talk about moving here. Where'd you move from?
Kamloops, BC is home originally, so I'm super familiar with a guy like Jerome McGinley or Shane Donor, right? Those dynasty years. That was right around the time I was born. Actually, I think they went 9-2, 9-4, and 9-5. So they might have won the Memorial Cup the year that I was born, if memory serves. Maybe it was 9-2, 9-3, 9-5. Anyway, Kamloops, BC is home. I moved to Edmonton to go to NAIT for broadcasting school after I finished up my degree at home at TRU in Kamloops.
Oh, right on. Well, welcome to Edmonton.
Thank you.
Was Edmonton a like on your list of places? Obviously, if you went to NAIT, I guess. I mean, that's what you know. But had you when you got into this and you're going to NAIT, what was the end goal for you, or what were you thinking?
It's certainly not that I'd be interviewing NHL players at 25. I thought that that'd be a few years away. But it's about work ethic, in my opinion, right? I went right out of high school. I did journalism for 4 years at TRU, and through there, I was able to do a little bit of play-by-play. I had my own awful sports talk radio show on the campus station, but those are the lumps that you take so that when you get to a place like Edmonton and there's sort of those, and it always starts as volunteer opportunities right now. So like if you're listening to this podcast and you're an up-and-coming journalist or you want to get into sports media or whatever, you have to be willing to work for free to build up that resume a little bit, get some of those things on tape. And then when you make the jump, and for me, it was because I had studied 4 years worth of print journalism and wanted to be a broadcaster. It was like, shit, what do I do here? Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that. So it was, I'm not going to BCIT. It's way too expensive to live in Vancouver. So my choices are Calgary and Edmonton. And the girl that I loved was in Edmonton. So that was the deciding factor for me.
all about a girl.
Yeah. You know what? We've eclipsed that phase of my life, and that's all good. I'm super happy to be here. But a big part of it, guys, was having the ability to hop in the car and drive home too. It's only 8 hours away. So.
Yeah. So I just want to point something out for Mike and Brett Luchansky if he's listening. It's all about working for free. You gotta work for free. That's what it boils down to.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, I just look around at, like, I look at my own trajectory. I look at other people who have gotten to where I am. It's about putting in the work after hours. And I'm not even like, I hate talking about myself in that aspect, right? Like, I'm still the producer. I still want to be able to grind. I still want to eventually work towards my name on the show one day, but you don't get that unless you're willing to sacrifice some of your time and build up those skills. And so that when the opportunity comes up to be the producer for a show and have this opportunity, that you're ready for it.
Well, I met, you'll appreciate this. I met Ron McLean's best friend growing up in Red Deer.
Yeah.
And he one of the things he talked about was, like, he knew right from the, Bob, the stats guy, says, is that why he hasn't received anything yet? And that's right, Bob. It's being the stats guy is a free job on the Oilers live stream. Anyway, I met Ron McLean's friend from high school, and he said, like, he never doubted that Ron would be somewhere, because right from when he was like 16 and all the kids were going out on the weekends, he was basically doing work for free at the local station on a Friday night, right? And so everybody's out having fun, and he was doing the extra hours and putting in the extra work. And and just doing a great job there. And of course, there's nobody that right now in Canadian NHL that has been really around as long as Ron McLean. At least now that Cherry's moved on to. I mean, there was
Hey.
that was that was that was probably part of the plan. He just wanted to be the Godfather, right? Get rid of the other guy, right? Move it over.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? First of all, I can tell you two stories about Ron McLean. When Hockey Day in Canada was in Kamloops in 2015, I volunteered for that as well. It's another opportunity to pounce on, right? And I didn't get to necessarily work with him directly, but I did make a coffee run. It was like one of those things. Hey, run down to the Tim Hortons and get Ron and Don some coffee. They both take it black. I can tell you that much. Anytime that I think hockey, it wasn't a hockey day, but it was one of the hometown hockey events here in Edmonton. Same thing. I was in school here at that time as well. So I got to go in behind in the production truck and meet Ron and Tara again and actually end up watching some of the Oilers and Montreal game, I think, with Mark Messier standing right there.
Nice.
And it was one of those situations. I didn't know what to say to him. You know what I mean? Like, hey, my dad says you were incredible. Like, you're in the Hall of, I didn't know what to say. But as far as Ron McLean goes, yes, any interaction that I've ever had with him, he is very much the same off camera that he is on camera.
Yeah, and doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean, he's been at it for so very long, right? For I think longer than Mike and I have been alive as well. So if that tells you anything, yeah, he's been there forever. You could probably learn a few things from him. I mean, it's great to have you in Edmonton and doing the show. Mike, I know, and I try to listen to Oilers now when I can. Obviously, being out of the broadcast area, I've got to stream it when I do, so I don't typically stream it in the car. Although I do look for the schedule, and I will stream it if it's somebody I definitely want to hear. I like listening to Friedman when he comes on, and I like listening to Burke when he comes on, and the two of them are great. And who's your? Do you have a favorite? I mean, the odds are they're not going to hear it. So
you guys more credit than that. Come on now. My favorite guest that provides information is Elliot. My favorite guest to interview, because it's a challenge, is Brian Burke. Brian Burke scares the hell out of me. Picking up the phone to call him, and you know what, even before I do that, texting Brian in the mornings every Thursday to say, hi, Brian, regular time today, business as usual, home phone or cell phone number, right? Even that scares the crap out of me. So from a standpoint of like trying to be a better journalist, my favorite guy that we have on the show is Brian Burke, and he is so dialed in, like I said before, to the inner workings of the NHL. And then you get Elliot, and Elliot's just a great human being. Like I love his hits. I love that he goes toe to toe with Bob too. Almost every day.
Oh yeah.
We've got Stofferisms. I think we all know that. We all listen to the show. We all know Bob's Stofferisms, and Elliot's one of the very few people that will call him out on a regular basis. So that's always humorous to get to hear too.
Yeah, and I, of course, I think Elliot does Oilers now right after he does the Fan 960 in
I believe
Calgary.
so too.
And so typically, if I've had a chance and I listen to both of them, it's quite funny, the remarks on both that he has, and sometimes he'll comment when he's talking to Bob about what he was talking to the guys over at Fan 960 about, which, by the way, you'll be, for those of anybody that lives in Calgary knows that Fan 960 spends about half the time talking about the Oilers. It's
really
Interesting.
interesting. You know what? So Peter Labardius is one that I've had the pleasure of interviewing. He's a great guy. One of the more approachable guys in our industry.
Yeah.
I got to meet Will Maltz sitting at an Oilers game when the Battle of Alberta was here. I guess that would have been probably end of January. Hilarious guys, right? Absolute cards. So I'm glad that for the southern part of the province that they get that representation too.
Oh yeah, no, I don't. I think like it is just a strong hatred for the Oilers, and some of it just goes back, right? I mean, and I think when I've of course I've met a lot of Flames alumni, and typically I'll be wearing an Oilers hat when I run into them, and they legitimately, and Mike and I were talking about this a couple of episodes ago, like back in those days, they legitimately hated each other. Like it
Oh
was,
yeah.
they had, of course, and I'm sure you saw it, the GQ Connor and Gretzky interview. I mean, it was clear that Connor doesn't have the same hatred, right? Like it is, he loves that the
Yet.
fans have that rivalry, right? He loves the rivalry that the fans have.
Yeah.
He talks about the energy of the fans, but he's looking at it like he hates any other team in the league, right? But back in the day, and I mean this is before your time, Brendan. Even the guys hated each other. Like this was not a rivalry anymore. It was a battle. And just watch any of the NHL reviews that are on Sportsnet right now, where they're showing some of those old Flames Oilers games. Like they were out to take somebody off. In fact, I was going to say Cooner, but McCowan.
Jamie McCowan.
Jamie McCowan, Matt McCowan, Jamie McCowan. I was talking to him, and he said they would send out depending on the shift, they would just get the the meanest guys out on specific shifts with one intent was to hurt the Oilers. He say, like they were, that doesn't happen now, right? Like, I mean, maybe more is riding on the games now than it ever was, but he and I were talking about that at one game. And Jamie McCown's a funny guy. Like, you want to talk about a guy that would give you an interview that would be just raw and pure. He's probably that guy. He's a really good guy. Like, I like talking to him, but they when he talks about it, they hated the Oilers. Like really, really hated them, and I think it worked both ways.
Definitely. I think you're exactly right. Mutual hatred, which after this season, I genuinely believe, because it went back with Kassian and Tkachuk to last November, right? November of 2018. So the fact that it's kind of been a 2-year thing, they both have young cores. They're both in the Western Conference playoff picture. And to me, that shouldn't change anytime soon. To hear Kyler Yamamoto after the game where the goalies fought say, and just in all his bewilderment, and I love this kid. I love him on the ice. He's really growing on me a lot off the ice. For him to say, like, just flabbergasted, like, we really hate each other, like just it seems like there was almost an element of fun brought in because there was some of that starting to creep back in. The difference between then and now, in my opinion, is the fact that you could spear Mike Bullard in the gut and not get a 25-game suspension. Now you do anything out of the ordinary, your pocketbook is massacred. You're not on the ice for an extended period of time. So, that's where the teams are saying, because these aren't as much players now as they are assets because of how much money owners are spending on them, in my opinion. So you're not going to tell somebody to go out there and harm somebody else. These are your business assets as much as they are anything else. But I really believe, gentlemen, that this hatred is creeping right back in here, and I hope and say, like, everybody play within the realm of the game, but Vancouver's got a very, very good young group of kids there too. So if we see 3 Western Canadian teams in this small cluster really go toe to toe for the next 5-10 years, I mean, I'm salivating at the thought of that.
I listened to Ethan Bear get interviewed by Jason Strudwick and Jason Gregor, and he talked about that night after that game, and he said Mike Smith couldn't sleep, and neither could I after that game for 2 days, he said.
Oh, I'm just buzzing, right? Like, can you imagine the amount of adrenaline, especially because Bear stepped up and fought Tkachuk of all people? Like, what?
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
Imagine if they meet in the playoffs. That's where that rivalry really gets built.
Totally. And that's why I'm so devastated about this season getting cut short, because even if they started the playoffs at these current standings, guys, that's exactly what we're looking at, right? Like, come on, feed us, feed the sports fans.
Still might happen.
Yeah,
you gotta
sure.
cross your fingers. That would be good for
the Last Dance is getting a lot of hype because of and that Piston Bulls kind of rivalry. Even that doesn't equate to the old Battle of Alberta. Like, it's close. It's probably as close as you can get it in an NBA sense, but it's still not the same thing.
I love that the hatred still flows too, right? Like I'm sure you guys
It
are up to
does.
date on the series, and
Yeah.
like watching, and even today on Twitter, for example, I saw Isaiah tweeted out his top 5 all-time basketball players and made a point of putting Jordan at number 4, right? Like that's just a big proverbial middle finger that he was looking to give once again until those two are in the grave. But that's sports, right? Like that's why we love sports, the live drama, the raw emotion. You can't script when Ethan Bear can't sleep for 2 nights because he was in a Tilly with Matthew Tkachuk, right? That's why I love sports. It's a big part of the reason why I love sports.
100%. Yeah, it's and maybe you guys are right. I mean, we're even Bob on Periscope. He says, we're at ground zero for a new Battle of Alberta. Yeah, from a fan's point of view, I mean, there's nothing better than rivalry, right? And typically, and I live in Calgary, and I'm an Oilers fan, and I'm born and raised in Edmonton. I came out here for work, but the thing is I believe in the rivalry. If you're a Flames fan, I always, I told people because they'd ask me the last time the Flames were in the Stanley Cup Finals, and there were Oilers fans with Flames. Flames flags on their cars and everything. And there were, people cheering for the Flames. In fact, some of the radio stations did a little Flames burn your Flames memorabilia and stuff after the run. But I wasn't that guy. I was the one cheering for Tampa Bay every step of the way. And then when it came time for the Oilers to be there, the following season, Oilers fans were asking Flames fans to do the same, like, cheer for the Oilers. I don't believe in that 100%. Like, I believe in the rivalry. I believe that if you're a Flames fan, under no cost or under no circumstance should you ever hope for an Oilers win. And the same, if you're an Oilers fan, under no circumstance are you ever hoping for a Flames win, unless it means playoffs, right? And in that case, even then, but you throw up a little bit in your mouth, right? And that's just, to me, that's the beauty of it. Like, you have to believe in that rivalry, and obviously be sane and don't do anything stupid. But Flames fan's a Flames fan, and keep it that way. I just don't think you come back from being a Flames fan anyway. I mean,
well, what's interesting is because they, statistically, they have been the better team over the last several years, right? But it's easy for Oilers fans to always fall back on the fact that we won 5 and Calgary won 1. And what made that obvious, I don't need to tell you guys, what made that so special was you had the 2 best teams in the NHL separated by a 2-hour and 45-minute drive, right? Depending on your lead foot. So that's super cool. And again, I say, like, if we end up with that, and I hope that we get a chance to really have that plot thicken here with a playoff series or 2 or however many now that these young cores have taken fold again. But if that's with Calgary, awesome. If that's with Vancouver, I'll still take that. But I always say this, guys. I have not walked this earth with a Canadian Stanley Cup champion. I don't care if it's the Leafs, the Habs, the Jets. Give me a cup north of the 49, please. I want to know what it's like.
So I would.
You don't want to know what it's like if Calgary wins.
That's right. I am in 100%.
Maybe that's the exception.
I am in 100% disagreement with that, and I this is why. I'll tell you why. I always figure if Arizona wins a cup, I'm going to go to work the next day, and I will never run into a Coyotes fan who's going to chirp at me that the Coyotes won the cup, right? Like if Nashville won the cup, I don't know a single Predators fan. Maybe in Nashville I'd get chirped for wearing an Oilers jersey, but I'm certainly not going to be in Calgary. Now, if Toronto wins the cup, I will never hear the end of it. No, that's a big if. I probably won't live to the day. I probably won't live to ever see that happen. But,
we'll see. If they can ever get past Boston, we'll have that conversation,
right,
okay?
But if the Jets win a cup, if Toronto wins, if the Habs win, if the Flames win, if the Canucks win, right? Like, you never hear the end of it. But if the Oilers win, it's the same thing. I'm not going to let them not hear the end of it. Like every time I see a Flames jersey, you're damn right. So I'm going to say who won the cup last, right? Like that's exactly
But that's
the way
why
it's
we're
supposed to be.
fans, right? Is for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
potential, the opportunity for that to happen. And I keep referencing back, but like because all three of these teams seem to be cycling towards success right at this same time, like, you know, give me these playoff series. Why not get past Calgary and have to play Winnipeg? Like, are you kidding me? Even the thought of an all Canadian playoff series again would be super exciting. But that's the live drama, Mike. That's a live drama. Don't shy away from it.
It's been a long time, you know, since Oilers fans have got to see us play another Canadian team in the playoffs. That means something. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But you know what? The last few cups, like you've had St. Louis, Boston, Chicago, LA, all of those teams. If you look at their roster, there's usually at least 15 Canadians on their team. It's not like we're not winning the cup. We still are. It's just, you know, they get to hold it for a day.
Yeah, that's exactly
Spends
right.
more time here in the summer because those guys
Watching-
take it home with them, right?
Watching OV win the cup though is still one of my highlights. Like it's, you know, I rarely, you know, I don't care. I still watch the hockey. Like I don't care who wins after the Oilers are out, right? But I love watching the hockey and seeing, you know, the storylines. And if it's a good storyline like Ovechkin winning the cup, then, you know, I'm all for that. And like he did, in my mind, he did so much for showing what the meaning of that trophy is for NHL players. Like you have to love everything that meant. And he is not in any need of cash, right? Like in fact, right, you know, I was listening to Duck there, Millard. Millard has he's got his own show podcast that he streams, and he had what's Lucic's agent's name? Johansson, is that right?
Jerry Johansson?
Yeah. He had
right.
Johansson on his show, and you know, Johansson was talking, which we've even heard some of these clips come out lately. Like the players don't get paid for the playoffs, right? Like they're paid already when they get there, right? And you know, and that's why some of these players that aren't going to be in the playoffs, they don't, you know, they're not particularly liking the fact that they might get sequestered away from their families for a little while when they've already been paid all the money they're going to get for the season, right? And you know that, and I get that, but this like shows, you know, when a guy like Ovechkin wins a cup, or you know. I don't know if you'd remember like Bork or like some of these guys when they actually get to that point and they win the cup and you get a full sense, right? Like when it is, if you talk about heart and determination, I really don't think that there's a league that is such a grueling run to the to win something out there. Like it's a different game. Stanley Cup playoffs.
No, for sure. Well, and when it comes to, because you look at NFL is definitely, I think, more physical of a sport, but you only play once a week for 16 weeks, right? Like NHL players suit up and armor themselves up and ready for war for 82 times a year before the playoffs. And then when the playoffs start and you got to win 16 more games against really, really good teams, like that's when the war actually starts. So, I mean, Mike, the way that you just articulated that Ovechkin story, I love that, because the difference between Ovi and Bork, as you guys know, is that Bork went to the super team to win that cup. Ovi stuck it out through so much adversity, and they had Adam Oates there as the coach and couldn't figure out how to utilize him, and then had he fallen off. And now we get to have the conversation. Is he the greatest goal scorer the game's ever seen? To which I say absolutely, because of the era that he's done it in versus Gretzky. You guys can argue. That could be a whole different podcast that we can do again, and we'll argue that point if you'd like. But to watch Ovechkin struggle with the same franchise year in, year out, get labeled as the guy who couldn't climb that hill, couldn't get over the hump, I think that's what made it so special to see. So as a franchise for the Oilers, after X amount of years, 30 years away from that kind of sweet vindication of all the hard work, imagine how nuts this city's going to go. And you mentioned that GQ conversation. What is one thing that Wayne Gretzky said to Connor McDavid? You win in Edmonton, it is unlike winning anywhere else.
The other thing he said is you are going to win. right? Like
Yes.
you
As
know,
cavalier as he could have said it, you're going to win.
Yeah.
You're too good not to. Okay.
yeah. I mean,
Sounds good to me.
Matter of fact, that was prophecy right there.
yeah.
No kidding.
That was probably the one thing that like when I heard was when he said that, I kind of did this big gasp myself, like did the great one really just say that? And I've actually listened to it a few times since, and yeah, no, that's great. I mean, this is what's your thought on that? I mean, you've been around these guys. Is there, is this the core group there? Is this the kind of team? I mean, obviously, you haven't been around, some of the other teams, but what's your thought? Do they have it in them to take us there?
They didn't until Ken Holland started adding some of these veteran pieces. I'm a big, Bob doesn't necessarily like when I sort of speculate about how the room is, and fair enough. I'm not in there, but I'm in there after the games, and I can sort of see, who are the guys that are giving off those real strong leadership vibes. Well, I didn't have to look any further than James Neal and Mike Smith. So when I'm watching how those guys are behaving, not only in the media, but I'm imagining how it goes on behind closed doors as well, and thinking that James Neal's a guy who's been to the Cup. Mike Smith has had as I don't know how I would describe his career, but he's been around the block. You know what I mean? So when you get some of these voices of reason teaching the incredible talents that are already on this team how to win, they've got good hockey players. It's about learning how to win right now. And what they've got set up coming to insulate this core from the minor leagues, which is the first time we've been able to say this in a long, long time with the Oilers organization. Ryan McLeod 2 years from now may well help this team in a third line center role win a Stanley Cup. Tyler Benson may well 2-3 years from now as your second line or even first line left winger help this team win the Stanley Cup. So there's more reason for me to believe now than at any point that I've followed the Oilers team, that they've got all the pieces in place on the team and coming up through the farm system, so that at some point in the next probably 5 years, guys, I think they're going to have, if they don't win it, they're going to have a damn good shot.
I got a question for you that I don't think you can answer, but Mike Smith and James Neal, if you think they're fairly integral to this group, how long do they keep them?
That's an awesome question. I think if Neal likes it up here enough, and it seems like he's got that real tight-knit relationship with Connor, if he's okay being a power play specialist, because I think that's what he is at this point in his career, great. To me, he's a guy who's gritty enough. He's a guy you want around in the playoffs. He's that veteran voice. He's that presence. Mike Smith, to me, same thing, but how long can a 37, 38-year-old goaltender get it done at the level that he has been? I think he proved to us this year that he's not your guy for an entire season, but I think he also proved to us this year that he's got enough in the tank that, I mean, maybe if this shot comes next year, these two guys are a part of it. And if it doesn't come next year, well, at least they've helped lay some of the groundwork for whoever's going to come and fill those gaps, to, whether that's the knowledge passed on to a guy like Connor or a guy that's coming up that we don't have on this roster yet. But I believe that their impact will be felt as long as they are around. So for me, next year at least, and then we'll see.
Yeah, this pause really probably hurts Mike Smith more than anybody.
Yeah. But there's a guy, again, you look like, does he need to make any more money at this point in his career? Probably not. His kids are around the rink more than anybody else's. They're always ripping around. They're adorable. It's hilarious to watch, right? So, you see that kind of guy and think, well, at this point in his career, man, he's probably comfortable taking more of a back seat if Koskinen's going to be the dude, or if they sign Braden Holtby. I don't know. He doesn't live too far from here in the off season. So I'm just saying, I don't want to stoke that fire too much, but you know what I mean? Their value should be there.
How mature was Sam Gagner in the whole trade?
Incredibly. Sam Gagner is somebody that I'd really like to see them bring back on a more reasonable contract. And I think I really believe from the player's standpoint that there would be an appetite for that as well. There's one of your quintessential guys who, first of all, understands what this market is like, probably better than most guys in the league right now, except maybe a Cogliano, for example. But yeah, his temperament, like you said, Mike, I think it's so valuable. They've got to make a push to bring him back.
Yeah, I sure hope so. We we talked a little bit about Holtby. One of Mike's friends was a in the BCHL, was a goalie that came from there. So he's got a good goalie background, some NHL pedigree in his family, and so we were talking a little bit about different folks, Koskinen, and how great the turnaround has been, and he thought that he wasn't too surprised by Koskinen's turnaround this year. And he gave us some good insight into the role of a goalie coach and how that works. And if you've been around the Oilers for a couple of years, so you know that Schwartz is. It's got there's kind of love and hate with the fans around the Oilers, mainly because we've seen so many goalies come through that just didn't seem to cut it, and then and they go someplace, specifically in Minnesota. Man, see, Stauffer wouldn't Dubnyk. Stauffer wouldn't have that problem. Dubnyk, right? And you see those guys, and then you get like a guy like Koskinen who gets for a full, pretty much a full season gets beat up on the glove side, right? And I started to talk to people about the role of the goalie coach and how that really didn't play into it, right? And in fact, like these guys, they have, it's much like a hitting coach, I guess, in baseball, right? Or a swing coach in golf. You got a guy like Tiger who, is going to have a great swing, 99% of the time, but something will be a little bit off, and that's what a coach will be there to help you with. But they're not going to tell you how to make those glove saves. So it was good though that Koskinen's come back from that. Interesting though, I'm interested in your the Holtby thing, and then the other thing that I'm kind of curious about is you hear Stauffer hint at things all the time on Oilers Now, and I've always been curious. Like, you guys, he spends the time flying with people from the team and around the team. Does that give him a level of knowledge, or do you think as being part of the media that's out there like this, that he gets, say, the same amount of knowledge that, the other folks do, and they might not say anything when he's around? Or does he have a legitimate sort of insider scoop that, should we be trying to read between the lines when Stauffer says something?
Where there's smoke... I've seen fire before, guys. I'm not going to tell you who he has access to. I don't know what other media members have access to necessarily, so I can't speak to that. What I can tell you is there's a lot of merit behind what he's saying. So for every bit as good of a broadcaster he is, times it by 2 for how good of a networker he is. He is working his cell phone quite unlike anything I've ever seen. He may as well be a player agent on the side of it all too, based on how much that cell phone plan gets worked out. So he's not pulling it out of his rear end, I'll tell you that much.
Sorry, Mike, you were going to say something.
Yeah, when he's on those airplanes, that's when we get to listen to you the most. So I don't mind that.
Yeah, you know what? I appreciate that. And for me, it's always a treat. It's always a little intimidating because we do have such a knowledgeable fan base to step in behind that microphone and expose yourself to the ire of the public opinion, right? But shoot, I'm on Twitter too, so it is a bit of an adjustment. It's always a treat though when I know he's doing his thing and I get a chance to do mine and kind of shine. And I don't want to be a radio producer, guys. I want to be a host. So anytime I get an opportunity to work towards that, I certainly try.
Yeah. Well, I mean, time, right? Time and
for sure.
Yeah, and certainly, we've I think between Mike and I and everybody I've talked to, appreciate when you're on there filling in. You're doing a great job. We geez, I got a million questions that keep coming up, and now I'm trying to think them back to Holtby. Thoughts there. I mean, you brought that up.
Okay, well, listen, that's not coming from anywhere but my own gut instinct. It makes a lot of sense for me because, you'll watch what happened when Matt Murray kind of took the rug out from underneath Marc-Andre Fleury right before that expansion draft. So, there's a couple scenarios that could come up here, but I think Ilya Samsonov seems to be the real deal in Washington, and he's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than Holtby is. So when that contract comes up, I would have to double check cap friendly. I think he's got a year left on on it, and then if he's not a UFA this offseason, but I think we would have heard more about that. So we'll fact check that. But it just makes sense because he's from Lashburn, Saskatchewan, right? It's right down the road, a couple hours just outside of Lloydminster. So I figured if he wanted to come back home and do that sort of thing, I'm pretty sure he spent his off seasons on the farm. It makes a lot of sense, and there's a fit there if there's not the belief that Koskinen's the guy. Otherwise, all you're doing is really saving a couple of years. And Koskinen's 31, Holtby turns 30 this upcoming year, right? So I love the idea of having somebody who's won the Cup before. I would consider Holtby a franchise goalie. So if they aren't going to find that within their own system, or even to help bridge the gap between whether that's a Shane Starrett or a Dylan Wells or a Stuart Skinner, or whoever the next heir apparent in the crease is for Edmonton, I don't mind the thought of Braden Holtby as the stopgap, because I think he'd be a good option to turn to win a cup in shorter order than other options believe. But again, like Koskinen was pretty phenomenal when called upon this season too. I just really believe that he needs a tandem partner.
So I believe Holtby becomes a free agent in July.
Yeah, he's.
It is this year. There you go.
Year.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and what's that price tag? Because that's ultimately going to come down to the player and the agent. That's set by the market. I would have to, again, dig a little bit deeper into the goalie market, nor do I think that Edmonton's going to be super cavalier with the cap space, given the problems that they've had over these last couple of years. But you don't sleep on an opportunity. I think the phone is at least going to ring. I think Ken Holland's going to do some initial exploring at the absolute very least on Braden Holtby.
So one of the things, we haven't talked a ton, Mike, you and I, about Ken Holland. We've had some conversations over the, course of the year and that. I've stayed every time I go watch a Oilers game, which is quite frequently. I usually stay at the Marriott, and I've run into Holland in the executive lounge there and had a chance to sort of overhear him, and when he was talking to a buddy there, and he didn't say anything, damn it, that I could take with me as as
no news nuggets.
No news. Yeah, he ended up sitting like almost back to back to me and talking. But what really struck me is just how sharp a man this guy is, right? Like, one of the things that one of the criticisms when the Oilers hired Holland was his age, right? And the concern that you got an old guy when there's a bunch of fancy stats guys out there thinking that that's not the direction we should be going, more of the Toronto or Arizona direction, and be looking at guys that have a fancy stats sort of lean and bend to them, and I think Holland has kind of, I think, shot all that out the window and done a considerably great job for what he was given. What's been your thought on him so far?
No, he's been a godsend, and it's amusing to me to look back at the flack that the organization was getting for bringing him aboard, because, stability was the buzzword. And I think that this season proved that the pieces were already in place. What was missing was the stability. And so I'll ask you this. If you guys look at what's going on in Arizona right now with John Chayka, you look at the uncertainty. Why is Kyle Dubas's head being questioned right now in Toronto? It's because they experimented with what happens if we just spend all our money on 4 incredibly talented players. Well, we're finding out that it doesn't get you any further ahead than having a team like the Oilers with the players that they have. And Leon Draisaitl, his contract is the best value in the NHL based on performance for me right now. Say what you will about David Pastrnak. I think Draisaitl as a centerman means more to this franchise. So what Ken Holland's done is he's looked and said, okay, we've already got a bunch of excellent talent here. What are we missing? We're missing maturity. We're missing stability. And we're missing some coach that can connect with them. Ken Holland, to me, lost that group in the first probably 2 or 3 weeks. And that reflected in the record. And when you try and have an old school coach, the Mike Babcocks, for example, who have that old school method, doesn't necessarily go that way. So instead, Holland turns around and hires another experienced coach. And Dave Tippett has meant every much the same to the success, in my opinion, as Ken Holland has. But those two working in tandem have been I think have far exceeded expectations, I would assume, of the franchise and certainly of the fan base.
Yeah, it's I mean, a lot was made when Tippett came, just of the turnarounds that he's orchestrated in the past of every, every franchise and every place that he's been. He's certainly, he's a treat to listen to in a presser or anything. Like, he's just again, when you talk about, like, over, listening to Ken Holland and just how sharp he is, the same goes for Tippett. But also, I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, you talk about having an old coach there, but Hitchcock was a good sort of interim guy, right? And he's still around the team, right, in a consultative capacity, is he not? Like, he's doing.
I've seen him in the press box a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that the role is wildly official by any means, but I think he has been around the team. Yeah.
But I think, just having, like, these are some great hockey minds, in my opinion, and guys that don't fit the and again, I mean, you probably haven't been around long enough to really fully grab a concept of the old boys club that Oilers fans were dreading year over year after probably the first 5 or 6 years of no playoffs, and then going into 7, 8, 9, and 10 was just unbelievably like, we were, you were waiting for every ex-Oiler to get a shot at coaching the team. Maybe to top that off was when they called Paul Coffey back, who is a great guy, right? Like, but it's the optics of it, right? And to not see success from it, to me, was a lose-lose situation, right? Like, they just, they couldn't win in that situation, and to get a guy like Ken Holland, to get Hitchcock and Tippett, and the other great thing is you talk about maybe getting a Holtby here, but to see some of the like this, it's not necessarily an old boys club, but it's like a hometown. Like, some of these guys, this is like Ken Holland's from here, and Hitchcock is from here, and like, just to see some of these guys come back and bring hopefully some glory to the Oilers again is phenomenal. Do you get a feeling for it, like, when you're around? I mean, obviously you're in a new arena when you go out there. First off, did you go to any of the old Coliseum? Did you go to the Coliseum and see any games?
I didn't get a chance to see. I didn't get a chance to see hockey there. I saw 2 wrestling events there, so I've been in the building. It was definitely time for an upgrade. I'll say that. Yeah. But I didn't get a chance to drink a Rexall beer with a hockey game in front of me. No.
Oh man. Well, I mean, it was something, right? Like, and I actually, I've talked about this before. Is I've been there for some Stanley Cup Finals games. Back way back, it was unreal. But do you get a sense now, when you're around the team, for somebody that, for the most part, is, somebody's come from outside? My guess, and you can confirm or deny, is that you grew up a Canucks fan, probably.
Sure did.
Yeah,
you bet.
And so now that you're here, though, right, and you're in there, do you get a real sense for the the glory and the tradition around the franchise?
Yeah, working on the show has also been a real cool opportunity for me to learn a little bit more. And we did the Legends of the Game series last summer, which was sort of a collaborative effort behind the scenes by myself and another producer. But it was an opportunity for me, in my inexperience, to learn some of the war stories, to find out why 87 was important versus why 85 was important. You know what I mean? So as far as hockey tradition goes, like, just looking what they did with the modeling of Rogers Place, and then, like, obviously the statue was outside Rexall too, but it's just so bloody empowering outside, and thinking about what could still be the new chapters of this as well. Like, I don't care whether there was a horseshoe strung across the franchise or not. Connor McDavid is an Edmonton Oiler, and by all accounts, he's trying to win a cup as an Edmonton Oiler as well. So it's very cool for me to be able to dip into the old school and read about the old school. And right now is a great opportunity because of all the classic hockey on Sportsnet, like you guys were talking about earlier. So, that's where the pride comes from. The excitement comes from the idea that there could be a whole nother wave of this to come. Whether it's a dynasty or not, I'm not sure, given the parity in the league right now. But you can start to feel this year especially things are bubbling up towards the right direction, and there is more of a buzz in early March, I guess, before things got canceled than there was at any point last year. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
It seems like now if you get to 3 cups, you're a dynasty, right?
Oh,
Like
completely. The 3 cups in
is,
6 years. Still,
yeah.
You're exactly right. Now, obviously, with expansion teams, that's going to look a lot different. But on the surface, you're totally right. Like, as a team as good as Boston, and that's been as good as they have been for as long as they have. What do they have? 1? Right? They've been to a couple finals. I think they only won in 2011. Am I crazy? Because Chicago beat them in 2013. Yeah.
Well, we've got stats guy Bob on, so he'll quickly tell us where that's at. So
I should have had my notes prepped.
we've been lucky. We've got he goes by Bob Goalie 1 on Twitter, but he's kind of our resident stats guy, and he fact checks us on the regular, but and we've had him on the live stream once or twice. We actually have a call-in line, which I've pretty much for the most part just stopped using. But it is there. People can call in, and Bob calls in every now and again, but he's really great. He's quicker at getting stats than I am. I'm sitting in front of my supercomputer here, and I can't even Google them as fast as he. I don't know if he remembers. Maybe it comes with the name Bob, and who knows? It's
Brendan, do you go to practices like on the regular or on occasion?
Unfortunately, I don't get to, because oftentimes they're skating right as I'm prepping the show. So Reed Wilkins will head down there on the morning beat and gather all that information. I've had a couple opportunities, like when the UFC put on the event here, I got to go down there and interview Frankie Edgar and Max Holloway, and that was a super cool experience. But that was like the only time I got to go there midday.
Because what I was gonna say is, like, I go to like preseason games almost all the time, and training camp. You can kind of go and watch practices, and over the years I've seen a few of the different coaches that we've had. Dave Tippett is far and away the most engaged and like hands-on coach that I've seen them have in decades.
Which is fantastic to hear. And here's the other thing that'll add to that is Jim Playfair and Glenn Gulletson, both as former head coaches, like that staff as a whole to me is really well-rounded right now. So, I think they help make Tippett look real good. And I think Tippett's demeanor as the head coach, like you're referencing, is also very, very easy for these players to feed off of. It's a cool confidence, right? He's been so even keel through. The only time he's ever really flipped his lid has been on officiating. It was like one time, and it was kind of half-assed anyway, right? So to have that presence on the ice like you're describing with the complementary staff that he's got around him, I attribute a lot of the jump this season, especially in a player like Kyler Yamamoto, for example, to that.
Oh, he's been awesome. By the way, Bob comes back 2011 champion and finals in 19 and 13. As I can do, because
there you go.
Because I've got nobody to tell me I can't. I'm going to take a little step away. Mike, you're in the lead. If we go offline, well, I guess that's it for the night.
We got an hour and a half, gentlemen. I might need another pee break in here at some point. I don't know. The highlight keeps flowing anyway.
Yeah, no, we usually shut her down at 10:30 just to keep with the time. But I've got to step away for 2 minutes. Mike, take it away. I'll be right back, guys.
So you bring up Jimmy Playfair at the one training camp thing I was at. I think it was at the end of practice. There's all the defensemen and Jim Playfair lined up on the far blue line, and they're taking shots on the far net, and he rips one top corner from the far blue line, and then Bear did the same thing right after. Yeah, Ethan Bear, like, did anybody see this coming out of nowhere?
Well, the thing is like 2 years ago, yes. And then after last year, nobody seemed to think that it was going to happen. And it was easy to believe one way or the other because of where he was drafted. When you put as much stock into that kind of thing as I do, like that's where the team values what the player could be, the likelihood that he's going to pop, right? So as a fourth or fifth round pick, I believe, even the team, I think this is a bit of, was it luck? No, because he has talked time and again about how much work he put in the off season. But from the first game, And I don't want to take anything away from anybody else on that back end. From the first game, Ethan Bear was the most calm and composed puck mover on that back end, which is what he was in Seattle as well in the WHL. So it makes sense. But man, did he ever make a difference for this team? And there was another player where I was just like, is this bubble going to burst? Is this development curve fool's gold? We've seen so many players have good stretches. Is it sustainable? Maybe not, but Bears was. And that was a huge benefit. And then you could slide a guy like Caleb Jones in, and he did his thing and contributed. And I think he's a nice piece that they'll have later on too. But to just be gifted not only a second line or a second pairing defenseman or geez, even a first pairing defenseman, but then you look at Kyler Yamamoto and him stepping up as well onto that second line. Like, what really changed for the Oilers this year was their depth, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, and Yamamoto comes in and doesn't just kind of, play safe.
Yeah.
He's like the reincarnation of a guy you probably didn't see much of, but Theoren Fleury. It's kind of the same guy, only in a better looking sweater.
Yeah, that's right.
Just that feisty, aggressive.
Well, you know what? Exactly, right? That edginess. And I love to compare Kyler to Brendan Gallagher, who I mentioned earlier. But you don't know. You don't know until you see them out on the ice how they're going to pan out. And Kyler was a point per game player, a plus player, and was benefited by the tenacity at both ends of the ice, right? So he could be trusted to be out there in the defensive zone, no problem, no second thought about that. And then also go in there and get under the skin and crash and bang around in the front of the net. So he is the lightest player in the NHL. So I do worry about longevity based on the way that he plays. But
Right.
But overall, I mean, my goodness, like if you can get 20 goals a year out of that kid, and I don't see why you wouldn't, that is a serious asset for them to have that a lot of people had written off already.
How you worry about injuries, right? Because he's slight, but I don't think he can really adapt his game and still be, a highly effective player. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's not like, I don't know, Eric Lindros kind of adapting more to be not as punishing physically. I think Kyler has to play that way to be effective and to, do what he does and be that spark plug that the team needs. And I mean, I guess you just kind of cross your fingers and hope that, that career can be 10 plus years and not, 7 or fewer.
Yeah, well, here's what you do, in my opinion, is you make sure that he's on it in the weight room, and he will be. I think that because he's had a couple of injuries early in his professional career, unfortunately for the Oilers, those came in the AHL. Unfortunately for the Oilers, that definitely slowed his development, but he's here now. So I think that if he can take this opportunity to understand, to add a little bit more weight, and the other thing is you've got a big body out there. If he and Nugent Hopkins and Draisaitl are going to be the line moving forward, or a line moving forward, Leon's not a tough guy, but he's a big guy, so that he's going to be able to go out there and the space is going to be created because players are drawn to him anyway. So I'm not super worried about Kyler. I think that he will adapt, and it's easier for a player of that nature to succeed in today's game than it would have been even like 10 or 15 years ago. So, I'm excited for what's in store for him. The types of injuries that he had weren't necessarily the kinds of things that I think are going to be recurring. So that's encouraging to me.
Yeah, like the last injury was a wrist injury, and if we keep it away from the ankles, knees, hips kind of thing, can have longevity.
Especially because of how he works in front of the net and dipping and diving in there and getting into those greasy areas. Craig Simpson was a way bigger body, but we know what happened to his career because of the punishment that he took out front. So that's where my concern comes in is he going to be able to go to those areas where he is so effective all the time, where he needs to be. The league is going to invite that right now because of the way that it's played, but the Western Conference Finals in Game 7, when you're out there against the Canucks and 6'7" Tyler Myers is working you over, like that can't feel good, right? So that's where my concern comes in.
Yeah, the league's changed a little bit. They don't let you get away with the vicious cross-checking that used to happen, but it definitely changes once the playoffs start. You're right. Yeah, and for me, it's interesting that because when I was watching earlier in the summer, it looked like Evan Bouchard was on a different level than Ethan Bear. You know, he's the one tallying all the points and leading the charge offensively. And then you get into when the NHL season comes around, and you know Ethan Bear is the one there taking the game, and Evans, you know, back down in Bakersfield. And I wonder, you know, with this pause, if Evan Bouchard has been able to do enough with his game so that when the, you know, training camp comes along, whenever that is, if he makes things harder on the Oilers by having to make a tough decision on what to do.
I would expect him to start next year, regardless of his performance in camp. I would expect him to start in Bakersfield because the formula, in my opinion, that they wanted to roll out was already set with Kyler Yamamoto. This year, it's Bouchard's turn. So I think if he has a solid first half down in the minors, we know his offensive game is ready to go. He's got a wicked shot. He when he comes up will probably be maybe not with his feet, but certainly with his passing, the best puck moving defenseman on the Oilers. So it's a matter of working out the kinks in his defensive zone. I think Jay Woodcroft is somebody who needs way more credit than he got over the last couple of years for what he's done in Bakersfield. So let Bouchard sort of percolate and marinate down there a little bit more and bring him up. Bring him up on New Year's Eve if you want to follow an identical pattern, assuming that the season starts on time, and see what you've got in this guy, because he's somebody that I believe could be a valuable asset for next year's playoff push. And don't forget that there's going to be a little bit of movement on that back end too. Does a Chris Russell get bought out? Are there more buyouts enabled by the fact that the salary cap could look dramatically different after this holdout or this pause? So there's a lot of things up in the air, but developmentally, based on everything that they've preached, I would expect Bouchard mid-season next year.
Yeah.
I think that's. I'm back, by the way. I've been listening for a little while. There's nothing that I had to shut you guys down for or mute you or anything like that. You know, generally that'd be Brendan's job, and his day job. He just sits by the mute button. Is this time I need to mute Bob? Or
No, one time, we were a little bit short-staffed, sort of towards the beginning of the season, and so I volunteered my time to get trained up to operate the road games from the station, like behind the board, right? And so part of that is, of course, overtime open line, where we turn the airwaves over, for better or worse, to the good Oiler fan. And sometimes people call in from different markets. So I think that there was a bad call when the team was playing in like New Jersey or something like that. And we had a fan from the East Coast of the United States phone in, and he was chatting with Rob Brown, and Brown basically debunked his point and then said, well, if you had a problem with it, maybe your guy should have won the face-off. And then the person turns around, and I had the board in delay, and the guy's like, oh, you gonna be a bitch about it? And F you then. And I'm like, oh, crap. So I hammer the delay button, like the dump call, and it went over the air anyway. So that was one of my first experiences as a board op for live post-game coverage. That was a blast.
Do you get a call on that one, or?
Oh, the text line lit, because I think Reed asked me had it gotten on air, and I'm like, well, I pressed the dump button. I don't think so. And then everybody that was listening texted in like, no, that was on air. People were howling. Nobody was complaining about it. It's funny. I mean, I hope that it's funny. Come on.
No,
They always get that. They always get that one guy from Boston like every night.
Scott from Boston. Oh man, I love the guy because he's hilarious. I think that as long as I'm not dealing with him, if I'm a listener, he's great radio. But that dude one day called in the middle of the day and talked to me for 15 uninterrupted minutes. It was awful. I couldn't get a word in. It was like it was almost a talent how he was able to talk without allowing the other person an opportunity to interject.
He talked at you, not with you.
That's right. Yeah.
Who's the guy that calls in? To be fair, when it's usually call-in time, that's when I tune out because I don't have because I got to stream it, right? So, but there's a guy that always calls in. I think he's from the southern U.S. somewhere, and Bob's got a weird name for him, or he calls in with the weird name. And he seems
on our show or the overtime open line?
On your show, on Oilers Now, when Bob does call-ins. Or
it's like TJ or something like that.
For some reason, Sylvia's mother came into my head, but I've got
Epstein's mother?
Epstein's mother. That's what it is. Who is that guy? What's the story about him? Because I've honestly tuned it out every time that comes on, so I don't know the full story. But
do you know Welcome Back, Kotter?
Okay,
Yeah.
I know Welcome Back, Kotter.
That's all I'm gonna say about it, fellas. That's all I'm gonna say about it.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
So I know
if you're curious, there's a deeper meaning behind what I'm saying, but I'm not going to come out with it. So you do the Wikipedia search for Welcome Back, Kotter, and see if you can piece it together, because that's how I had to figure this all out.
Oh, so you had to as well, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. I will definitely look it up and figure it out because
you hit my Twitter DMs. I'll tell you the truth, okay? But the camera has to be off.
All right. Okay. I mean, as I said, for the longest time, I hear it and then I just kind of tune out and I don't know what's. I've never heard the background. I figured guys that have been listening to Oilers Now forever probably knew the backstory, and maybe I should ask Dursa if he knew. Or do you know Dursa? Do you know the backstory? I mean, we don't have to talk any further on it, but I'm gonna have to do my search and figure it out myself.
I know Welcome Back, Kotter, and I know Epstein, but Epstein's mother is going to take a little bit more research.
Just think about the notes that Epstein's mother used to write.
All right,
and then I'll let you guys. When I come back onto the show, we'll have a laugh, and I'll tell you if you're right or wrong. Okay.
So I asked Jack Michaels where he was when he got the call to do play-by-play for the Oilers. Have you heard the story yet? He was actually on, I believe it was his way to Disneyland with the family or something like that. First time I had him on my podcast, we were talking about him getting the call to be the play-by-play guy for the Oilers, and he said he was floored by it. Like it was unexpected, I think, for him. And as Oilers fans, geez, we got to be the luckiest. Like he is, bar none, one of the best play-by-play guys in the league. And his fight calls are legendary. How about you? When you got the call to be producer for Oilers Now, I mean, somebody in your boat that wants to do broadcasting and specifically sports, I assume, was kind of where you wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that day? Where were you at? And what's the story behind it? Obviously, there's got to be a bit of an interview process. I think you were friends with the previous guy, right? Is that?
No, actually, we didn't know each other outside of the handoff of the roles. But so the story goes like this. So I was actually this all ties together with everything that I'm doing right now. So my internship, I started school in the winter semester, and that meant when everything looped back around that I could do my internship in the summertime. So instead of taking 2 years to do the program, I could do it in 18 months and be done by the time that September rolled around again. So I'm all over it. I get a practicum in Lloydminster at the TV station, and I had sort of made the connection. And again, this all comes back to like stupid stuff that I was doing for free just on lunch breaks at school. But I also street teamed at Bell Media for a while because I thought that it was a good segue into TSN and TSN radio and that sort of thing. It made a lot of sense. So made a couple connections there. I get a call when I'm in Lloydminster from the marketing director of the Sherwood Park Crusaders. And he says, hey, do you have an example of your play-by-play work? And of course I did, because I had been doing stuff for the Nate Ooks at that time. So I sent him in and right away, like he didn't provide any other contacts, but I'm like, okay, I know these guys. I know that Taylor Medic just signed off as their play-by-play broadcaster, so I think they might want to hire me on, right? So interviewed for that. They bring me on. I'm their guy. Awesome. So I leave my internship early. But the Crusaders job, of course, you're working in junior A hockey. And like we talked about off the top, it's not exactly the most lucrative, like cash cow of a business, right? So it's like, holy cow, what am I going to do as a secondary job here? Because I'm pursuing my dream on one angle, but am I going to have to go back to slinging shoes at Foot Locker to put a roof over my head? Probably. But But I get a message from my former boss at Bell Media, or one of them anyway, and he says, "Listen, there's this opening. I think you'd be a really good fit for it." And I'm like, "Holy crap! Okay." So doctor up my resume. I've already got the one position with the Crusaders, and went through the whole application process with Ched. The general manager of the Crusaders actually, his kid, there's a bunch of like nepotism sort of, maybe that's not the right word here, but there is a connection. So our programming director, his kid actually played on the Crusaders a number of years ago. So the general manager knows my program director. I go to the general manager of the hockey team. I say, "Yo, there's this job opening at 630 Ched. Like, do you think that do you know anybody there? Do you know anybody who would know anybody there?" And he pulls up the program director's phone number and says, "I'll make sure that he sees your resume." So it wasn't as if I was like, gifted the position. People like, "Oh, I got you the job." No, you got me the interview. I got me the job because I studied my ass off and worked my ass off to get to where I am. So went through that whole interview process. I get the phone call. I was in Canmore watching the Crusaders play, or pardon me, Camrose. Watching the Crusaders play an exhibition game at the beautiful rink that they have there. Yeah. And I was standing next to Kyle, the general manager of the team, when the programming director phoned me and offered me the position. So it was kind of a nice full circle runaround. And I know that's the long version of everything, but to go back to what we were talking about before, like, this is a position that I was ready for based on the fact that I had hosted some hokey college radio show, 4 years ago or whatever, and then had been board hopping at the different stations. So I understood like the radio market and at least the technical aspect enough that I could step into this role. So, and then from there, it's just been a matter of gaining confidence in terms of interviewing higher profile people.
Oh, right on. Mike, when Dursa heard that he was going to be on Oilers Live, he was, I'm sure he was just as overjoyed. No, you know what? That's awesome. I mean, that's the way it works. I wouldn't call that nepotism at all. I mean, that's, utilizing your contacts, and something that you, obviously in your role, you're going to have to do more and more. Like, I love watching, like, when Trade Center comes around, or Trade Day, and you see these guys sitting around the booth, and for the most part, I'm not sure if they know what they're saying, because they're sitting there looking at their phones the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And they're all, I do this, as I say, for fun. I one of the things, and Mike's heard me say this, I actually went to school with Jason Strudwick, and we were in high school together, same grade, same English class, that sort of thing. And, the way the trajectory that our lives went is kind of funny, because I pay to play hockey. He got paid to play hockey. I basically pay to broadcast. He gets paid to broadcast. And so, when you get a chance to do all of the things that somebody would pay to do, but you get paid to do them, obviously you've done something right. And so, it's really cool to, to hear that, and as I said, using those contacts and watching those guys on Trade Center and sitting there on their phones, and then some of the people that I've met just through doing the podcast, and having them, watching them grow up as well over the last few years in, various different people. Like I know some people who have broken some trades in the NHL because, of the agents that they know, or right, like, and sort of kind of figuring out some of the behind the scenes stuff that you don't really, we're typically not privy to as fans, but you kind of get a little bit of an idea for it just watching them on their phones. So it's good, right? Like, you got to start somewhere. I mean, those hockey connections, if you're not out there playing junior hockey, and I don't know if you did or not, but if you're not out there playing junior hockey, you got to make them a different way. And some, maybe that's the play-by-play, right? I think it's neat, though, that you were doing the ooks stuff, or get on you about that at all, or?
You know what? I'm not even sure if he knows that I did that, but it's funny because, I guess if you look at his background and how deeply involved he was and doing the play-by-play with the U of A, so that'd just be another reason for him to take a little jab at his producer, right? You put it interestingly there, and I'm super grateful, and I've almost had to so of course you're a little bit starstruck at first when you're starting to see some of these guys, and but very quickly it becomes the norm in some senses. And when you're at that rink 41 times a year, and holy cow, guys, I have the best seat in the press box. It's unbelievable. It's right on the red line. I couldn't ask for better. You know, I'm, like you said, I'm being paid essentially to sit there with the best season's tickets in the building. I really believe that. So there's not a day that goes by where I'm not grateful for that kind of thing. But as far as like, you know, it is still work in a lot of senses. So, you know, there's the pressure of going there. I sit up there and I spend the first period trying to figure out what I'm going to ask. If we have a lead or we're tied, I have to go down there and do a walk-off, and I'd better not sound like a moron. So, you know, there's a lot of pressure that comes along with the privilege and the opportunity. So, you know, it's definitely been an adjustment period in that sense. Not that I wasn't ready for it, but you start to see so many more things. You start to have different things coming at you. The game is so quick, right? So like my questions, by the time I'm done walking from up top to down low, might change entirely, and I'd still be ready. I'd better be ready to sound smart. You know what I mean? So it's been a whole trip, and it's been helping me grow as a person and as a professional, and I'm super grateful for all of it.
Yeah, you know, that's when you talk about that, you know, and I mentioned my old roommate, she would, you know, be at a Flames game and she'd say, you know, typically you had the game story written by midway through the third period. So, like, if you could imagine, you know, if a team comes back with 3 goals to tie it up, you know, halfway through the third, that's pretty much ruined all of the work that you've done up until that point. And you know, it's fascinating. Us as fans, you know, we consume and we take in all of the blogs and all of the columnists and all of the radio shows, but we don't quite typically understand some of the work and the effort that goes around it.
I'm glad you bring that up too, and I know we're kind of getting up against the clock here, but it's really taught me to be a student of other people that are functioning as sports journalists, and particularly just because I'm doing the walk-offs, I'll listen to a lot of, like, say Tessa Bonhomme is doing some coverage for an international tournament. I'm listening to what she's asking, I'm listening to how she's asking it, and then I'm putting it as a note in my phone because I can apply what other people have thought and considered and you know, done for questioning and that sort of thing. And if there's a spot in the game that applies, I'm going to use that. It's not thinking outside the box. It's thinking inside a different box, right? So you've always got to have your ears and eyes on the rest of what your peers are doing, because that's where you're learning too. And you know, I say you, that's where I'm learning, certainly as one of the fresher faces in sports media.
Yeah, it's awesome. You know, we've got a few minutes left, so this is typically where, although Dursa doesn't get that, I usually talk so much, he doesn't get a lot of questions in, so the fact that I walked away, he's probably pretty happy. Like, normally I've got
both walked away.
Yeah, normally I gotta...
I had to turn the lights on. I felt horrible. Oh my God, I'm broadcasting from a dungeon.
That was all right.
He still had his headphones in. No, I on the other end took the headphones off and just took off.
I'm mobile. Don't worry.
Yeah. I'm not. I'm stuck here. Stuck here by a cord. No. At this point, you know, any last sort of points, Mike, that you want to add in or anything?
Well, I see he's got a Texans hat on, so I got to ask him who his teams are and who his favorite athletes are.
I do cheer harder for the Texans than I do for any other team in any other sport, because my role with the Oilers doesn't allow me necessarily to be the overt fan. I can't do that, right? I can't remain unbiased and strut around the streets in a Connor McDavid jersey. So I do that at home instead. But I'll wear my Texans hat. What they're doing right now with their roster and trading away DeAndre Hopkins is beyond me. But Deshaun Watson is incredible. And he's a real good example. Like, you guys are talking about analytics before. There's a place for that 100%. But I also believe that, you know, the guts and the will to win and the championship mentality is a big factor. So somebody like Deshaun Watson, the quarterback of the Texans, definitely one of my favorite athletes out there on and off the field. You got to be a Blue Jays fan, right? And that was sort of my first introduction as a young whippersnapper to watching the country rally around one sports team. You guys would have got to see it a couple years before I was born. So back when they were making their playoff pushes, 2015, 2016, those teams were a lot of fun to watch. Basketball-wise, I follow everybody, guys. I'm super big into fantasy sports. So when it comes to baseball, basketball, it's just like kind of whoever's on my fantasy teams. And I do dynasties too. So I've got players that I love a lot. I don't necessarily have the affinity to teams per se.
Oh man, basketball is the one sport, and I'm a big guy. Like I'm 6'5". I told Mike I was in Phoenix one time, and I even got to ride the elevator with the starting lineup for the Golden State Warriors, and
No way.
it's crazy.
What year was this? Like what version of the Warriors?
Geez, it was about, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago. And I actually, this is how little I know of basketball. This is sad. But I actually had just come away from talking to Billy Bean, which is cool.
Really?
Yeah. So
No kidding.
I had which I don't know, Mike, if I ever talked to you about this. I got a picture with him, but I had about 5 to 10 minutes one-on-one time with Billy Bean. And then I go to the elevator. I'm going up to my room, and there's a bunch of us waiting. They just left, or I think I don't know. I can't remember time of day. It must have been, they were in their tracksuits anyway. And nobody waiting for the elevator wanted to get in the elevator with them. And I'm like, screw this. I got in.
Yeah, are you guys kidding me?
They're going up to like the 7th or 8th floor, and I'm going up to like the 4th or 5th floor. And so I hit the number. And the tallest guy, who I don't remember who it was. I had to look these guys. That's how bad. Like I'm just not a basketball fan. I had to look up.
Well, it's 7 or 8 years ago. That team was terrible too. I'm trying. Monta Ellis maybe would have been their best player at that point. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Steph was probably there still.
Yeah.
Steph would have been like a rookie at that point.
Steph was in the elevator with me. That's the only guy that I remember. But whoever the tallest guy was, like I was. So at 6'5", I felt like a midget, right? Like. And which is crazy, right? Like I've never in my life felt short. There was one guy that was my height, and I think it was probably Steph, if I'm not mistaken. And
you were probably a little taller than Steph.
The tall guy though in there, the tallest guy, which he towered over me. I was in a suit, and I walk in, and he says, "Must be some important conference," right? And I'm like, I look up at him, and I'm like, yeah. That was it, and then ding, I'm off the elevator. That was it. So that was
that's super cool.
That's
I gotta ask. I mean, like
basketball.
Billy Bean's such an interesting character, and like somebody who had the stones to be sort of a revolutionary in terms of how baseball was looked at with analytics. What was he like as a person to talk to?
So the conference that I was at, he was the keynote. And so
I see what you're saying. Okay,
yeah, so he was the keynote, and the reason that I got a chance to talk to him one-on-one after was my flight out of Phoenix was the latest flight, and everybody was taking the sedans to the airport, and so I was waiting, till the very last minute, and I wander out of the room. And I'd actually won a couple of things at this conference, so I had been up there to shake his hand a couple of times. My golf game sucks, and so one of the reasons I was up there to shake his hand is we had a golf tournament at this thing, and I was probably the worst golfer, so I won an award for that. And of course, when I got up there and Billy Bean says, "So you're the worst golfer," I did a little fake swing and got a good laugh out of the audience, and Billy laughed, he laughs, pats me on the back, and later on I walk out. And I think it was about 8 years ago. It was, who was after Kevin Lowe as GM, Mike? From Vancouver.
Tambellini.
Yeah, Tambellini was the GM at the time. It was the year that, actually that same year, because it was Grapefruit League or whatever it is in Arizona. It was that year that Oakland afterwards went back to the World Series that year after as well, and that same season. And so, but anyway, I went in. This was after Moneyball, so he talked a lot about Brad Pitt, but he talked about his own, like what the real story was around Moneyball and all of that. And he said, he talked about how he was a highly touted player in the draft, but he just, he didn't cut it, and he started to realize. He talks about some of the analytics that went into it, and how he really wasn't the stats guy, but the other guy was, the stats guy, but he kind of bought into that. And he was incredible. Like, he was just a really neat guy, and to listen to him talk about it and just how he bought into a system, and how he had to, in some ways, get over his own ego as a GM, to really buy into the system and to buy into something that would sort of change baseball, really. So when I got afterwards, I go outside and I see him there, and he goes, "Hey," I said, "Hey," and I said, I stopped and talked to him, and I'm a ball fan, but I'm a hockey fan first. And I said, I said, Billy, like, I'm a really big baseball fan, but my real team, like my true passion, is hockey. I said, any chance you know Steve Tambellini? I said, because we could really use your help in Edmonton. And he had a good chuckle about that. And he said, no, I don't know him. But he did say that it was funny because we did talk about it. And he is like, as far as, like, just because of the whole Moneyball thing, he's a bit of a star when it comes to being a GM, but he is as folksy a guy as you'll ever meet in your life. Like, I could have sat there and talked to him for a half hour or an hour, and it felt like he would have just sat there and chatted with me. Like, and of course, I didn't have the time, and the Golden State Warriors were waiting at the elevator for me. So, but no,
that's a great story. It's good to hear. You always like to hear when the larger than life personalities are down to earth when it matters the most.
It was great because I did, as I said, I got a picture with him. So I think that I can't recall. I might have put it on Facebook or Twitter, but after they got back to the World Series that same season, I, of course, suggested that maybe I might have had something to do with it because I saw him during training camp. So, yeah, no, absolutely cool. I don't know how we got down that path. Oh, basketball. I hate basketball. I've seen Sweet 16 games live. I've seen everything live. Man, see, this is why I can't do this.
Did you at least enjoy the Canada coming together last June when the Raptors won it all? Because that should have been, regardless of whether you're a sports fan or not.
No, I watched it, and typically I will watch any championship game. I'd watch cricket championship games if I knew what channel it was on. And I even know who the cricket star is, but I love that. I love that part. I love playoffs in any sport, but it comes down to, I've been to Raptors games. As I said, I went and saw. It was a great experience. I went to Cowboys Stadium and watched Sweet 16. It was Michigan playing Jayhawks, and a Canadian boy started shooting threes at the end of the game and tied it up, and then it went into overtime. And in the Sweet 16, they play back-to-back, so if you go watch one, you get to see two games when you're there. Just being in Cowboys Stadium, where the size of the screen is larger than a basketball court, which is absolutely unreal. You actually find yourself, I don't know, you recall the first time you were at Rogers Place. The first time I sat in a seat at Rogers Place, I actually realized after 2 minutes that I had been watching the screen and not watching the game down below. Like,
I still do it. Yeah, it's so freaking crystal clear. It's almost like mesmerizing at times.
Well, now, Cowboy Stadium, the screen is about 5 times that size. I don't know. I mean, maybe Bob, the stats guy, could tell us exactly what the difference in size is.
I thought it spanned the whole football field. I thought the screen was like something like 100 yards.
In fact, if you watch the Cowboys and you watch in between plays, all the players are all sitting up there watching the screen, right? Like, that's what they do. Like, it is massive. And so you're watching that game, but again, same thing. First time I'm there, I'm sitting there. Even the small screen, which is at the end zones, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. The small screen's bigger than Rogers Place screen. That's just small, like the end zone screen. But the other one, and I've got a picture. I'll post it on Twitter later. But I've got a picture where it is legitimately bigger than the basketball court, and it's crystal clear. And you have to fight your tendency to watch the screen and not the game down below. But watching that was really cool. The Jayhawks were definitely the favorite at the game. But this, as I said, this Canadian boy, and that's how much I know basketball. He kept hitting these threes.
I'm guessing Nick Stauskas. Was he a white dude, kind of a white wing player?
Oh, geez, I don't. You know what? I don't remember.
I'm gonna claim that one right now.
Yeah.
I think it was Nick Stauskas out of Michigan.
You know what? I'll have to look it up
Anyway.
because. But it was phenomenal. Like I didn't get into the game. Like I have trouble watching a live basketball game for the first 50 minutes. I mean, it's not even. Sorry, it's not even that long. But like the first 40 minutes of the game, because it just seems like a lot of back and forth to me. And so that was the game. It was a buddy and I. We were there for a wedding, and the game was on when we were there, so we stopped. And then at the end of the game, this kid starts shooting these threes, and so we started getting into it. And there's this other kid. He was probably like early 20s, and he was a big Jayhawks fan, and he was annoying the shit out of us. Like we could not stand him whatsoever. And every time they'd score, they'd get a basket, he just had this annoying cheer. Well, Michigan comes back, so of course, all of a sudden we're huge Michigan fans, right? And we're high-fiving. And then Michigan comes back, ties it up with like a second left, wins it in OT. And this kid's practically crying. And my buddy and I are hugging in the stands. We're so happy. That was the
just
year,
rubbing his nose in it.
That was the year Florida made I watched a little bit, but Florida had a sort of a magical run. Florida State, I think, into the Sweet 16. You know what? I'm going to have to look that up, and I'll post it on Twitter later. But anyway, to me, that's like basketball has to have something like that, like some big thing. I've just been to a regular season Raptors game a couple times or whatever, and I'm just not that into it. I don't know.
Yeah, fair to say. You know what? I'm kind of the same way, but you get down to the nitty gritty of some of those important games, and that's where it becomes a lot of fun.
I think
it just takes forever because there's so many timeouts. That's the real bitch of it.
Yeah.
The last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter take an eternity. Exactly. The last dance coming out makes me, appreciative that I was born a lot earlier than you, because that 90s, the Bulls, Pistons, Bulls, Knicks, that was the NBA. I was alive to see a little bit of the Celtics, Lakers with Magic and Larry and that, and that was really good basketball too, and it was physical too. But when Chicago and Detroit started meeting in those early series, I remember all that. I mean, it was a war. It was as close to the physicality that you see on the ice or on the football field that the NBA has had. My dad's told me stories about in the 70s. There was a guy that played for Boston that his job was to go and goon the best player on the other team. They had that in the NBA back in the 70s. But from a whole team perspective, like Chicago, when they ran up against Detroit and even New York a couple years after, the Knicks played that physical grinding style. And it was kind of like a battle of perseverance, almost like the Oilers too. Like, Mike was talking earlier about the Flames would always try to hurt people on Edmonton. Detroit, New York were trying to do the same thing. They were going after Michael at first and Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, and they had their way. I mean, Horace Grant would almost cry in games because he was just getting physically abused to that point, and Scottie would get like it. If you watch Scottie Pippen when he was young with Chicago, he was this lean, lanky guy, but as his career progressed, him and Michael both started working out every morning at 5:00 and, putting on that weight. And, and then Horace Grant even got stronger. That was awesome. I don't care what Mike says. That was good to watch. I mean, I was a point guard growing up. My dad, he was about 5'8". He played games in Fenway Park. He grew up like in Massachusetts in Cape Cod, and he was a really good baseball player. And then he came to Canada to teach, which is how I, became an Albertan really, because he met my mom from Vegreville. and then he started coaching basketball. So when I was born, I kind of lived in the gym. But you're growing up in northern Alberta, so you got to play hockey too. So I've got both, and kind of my point guard experience kind of helped me to see the ice when I'm on the ice, and that's kind of my best attribute when I play. But yeah, I emulate like all kinds of athletes to, further my game on the ice, and like we still play a little bit. I'm not going anywhere, but you know what I mean? Like you watch all these athletes and you try to take pieces of what they do to better you at whatever sport you're playing,
100%. And like, my dad always preached to me, because I was a multi-sport athlete growing up, the importance of that, right? And because Wayne Gretzky is somebody who I don't need to tell Oilers fans, like he preached that soccer, lacrosse, whatever it was, like you've got to be able to borrow elements from other sports in order to make you better at your craft, because it helps you see things through a different perspective. So yeah, there's 100% merit to what you're saying there. And that's, it's a lot of fun for me now. Like I love defense. Like I love guys out there like Chris Russell, man, when he gets out there and blocks a shot, that kind of stuff that fuels me. That's the way I like to play. So being a soccer goalkeeper and then being a hockey defenseman and just the vision and understanding habits and traits, sport to sport, there's a lot of similarities. So that's, and again, we've gone on for so long here that we've talked about so much stuff, but like when we talk about club schools for hockey and these young kids that are just devoting everything to hockey, I mean, obviously we're seeing a lot of success at younger ages and we're seeing a youth movement in the league, but is there something that's being lost perhaps by the fact that a lot of these kids do not have the time anymore to be multi-sport athletes? I don't know. Jury's probably still out on that one.
Oh, for sure. 100%. Well, you know what, Brennan? You now hold the record for taking us over. Look at you. Yeah.
I love it. I'm not even a radio host, you guys. I'm the dumb producer. This was a blast, though. I appreciate you thinking of me and having me on, for sure.
I'll tell you.
Enjoyed it immensely.
I'll tell you a quick funny thing. I asked Jack Michaels to be on the show, and he said, yeah, I'll give you 15 minutes. And then we asked him when he was on here. He said he goes on for a little bit. He went for about 40, 45 minutes. And I kept time checking him, just to be considerate of his time. And he says, the reason I tell you 15 minutes is because if I told you I was going to be on for 45 minutes, I'd be on for 2 hours. Right. And so he loves to talk. He's a hell of a guy, really good guy. Anyway, this has been a ton of fun. Really appreciate it. I know you and I have been chatting for a long time to get this done up. And I want to say really appreciate you coming on. It's great to see you doing so well on Oilers Now. I think, it was just a real treat to have you today, and glad that you're now doing something with the Oilers instead of those dastardly Canucks that
those darn Canucks. Yeah, well, like I said, you know what? Thank you guys so much for even considering for my opinion to be held on your platform here. It means a lot to me, and it was a lot of fun. I'd be happy to do it again. So you just give me the call, and we got to do the old role reversal. We'll figure something out to get you guys on the show when I host or something like that too. We'll get that in the works.
You bet. Awesome. All right.
You've come a long way, Brendan, from the first day, because I'm pretty sure I tuned in when you first started, and you could see the nerves. I live in Grand Prairie. You could see your nerves from here.
For sure.
and now it's you can still sense a little bit there, but it's not like it was. It's becoming natural to you, so it's a credit to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And hey, that's where I'm at right now, guys. I got to figure out what my voice is and who's going to take it seriously. So having the opportunity to do something like this goes a long way. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And for the Oilers Live podcast, this ends another stream. Everybody have a great night. Stay healthy. Stay safe. See you soon.